fields is not a new phenomenon. I have a drawing here. It's a text page right out of the textbook, so it's a little difficult to see. And what I'll point out to you is this. This is a time scale. Present time is at the top. Ancient time is at the bottom. This scale represents 4.5 million years. 4.5 million years. And what we're seeing here, the two columns that I'll call your attention to, is this column right here, of these little boxes, and then right next to it, this column right here. And what these columns represent, each of these blocks represents a period of geologic time when Earth was oriented either north-south, the way we know it now, or north-south reversed. So for example, this block right here represents a long period of time when the north and south poles of the Earth were identical to what we now. This is another time when they were identical, and look how short this period of time is. This column represents periods of geologic time when our north and south poles were just the opposite of what we are right now. So what you see is that many times throughout Earth's history, this is why I'm showing you this slide, many times throughout Earth's history, Earth has gone through a 180-degree magnetic polar reversal. We see at least 14 times in the last 4.5 million years, right here, that we have had this polar reversal. The most recent that we're aware of through the geologic evidence appears to be between 11 and 13,000 years ago, right around in there. It coincides very well with Plato's accounts of the sinking of Atlantis and the biblical flood and some of the geologic evidence that we see in Egypt and the Middle East. Ancient texts, however, indicate that we may have experienced one of these polar reversals as recently as 3,500 to 3,600 years ago. 3,500 to 3,600 years ago. The traditions and the prophecies of many of the indigenous peoples seem to indicate that 3,500 years ago is not long enough to find in the geologic record. So we wouldn't expect to see it in a rock record. Where we do see evidence of this is in the ice records, in the Greenland ice caps, and in the Antarctic ice caps, as we're taking measurements of oxygen and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere caught in little bubbles. Something was happening 3,500 or 3,600 years ago. It also coincides very nicely to Zecharia Sitchin's work through his book, The 12th Planet, and many of the catastrophic events that he has indicated. So we may have experienced in our world a 180-degree magnetic reversal as little as 3,500 years ago. To the best of my knowledge, this has never happened with 6.5 billion people living on the planet. And it appears that you and I are living the precursive days, the precursive experiences to precisely this experience and more. And watch this. This is the magnetic fields. And what I ask you to remember from this is simply that as the magnetic fields drop, the faster they drop, the more they drop. And we appear to be moving toward a point where we have no magnetics, 0 point magnetics. 0 point magnetics. Now, at the same time, there is another parameter that is unfolding within our experience right now, and it is simply called base resonant frequency. It's a fundamental vibration. It's a fundamental heartbeat of the Earth. Every time the Earth pulses, every 1 second of our experience, when the Earth pulses electromagnetically, that pulse traditionally, historically, has been a certain number of beats per second, or cycles per second, or hertz, as the term is called. Traditionally, that number has been about 7.8. This number was first measured directly back in 1899 and 1900. And all the way through the early part of this century, through the 20s and the 30s, throughout World War I, World War II, all up in the 1950s, as late as the early 1980s, this number held constant, approximately 7.8 cycles per second. It is such a constant that actually in 1958 there was a meeting of a global meeting of technological countries that agreed from 1958 on not to publish the base resonant frequency of the Earth, not to publish that information, because it became a fundamental communications frequency, and later was key in new weapon systems, electromagnetic weapon systems, based on this fundamental heartbeat of the Earth. That was the IGY, the International Geophysical Year. Well, we believed up until recently that this number 7.8 was a constant, that every second that we experience, the Earth pulses a certain number of times. Well, something interesting began to happen in the, again, in the mid to late 1980s. What we see is this. There's 7.0, here's 8, 7.8, all the way through 1970s, 1980. In the mid to late 1980s, 86, 87, right around in there, that number began to increase mysteriously. And it went from 7.8 to 8 to 8.23 to 8.6. At the end of 1995, the number was validated at 8.6 cycles per second. In just a few years, it had been a constant throughout the time that we had been measuring this parameter. Now, in early 1996, researchers are reporting numbers as high as 9 cycles per second. While I have not seen that directly, those are the reports that are coming in. And I wouldn't be surprised because, as you can see on our little chart here, this green, the green line that we have drawn, this is the representation of this fundamental heartbeat, of the base resonant frequency, or the Schumann frequency of the Earth. This is frequency. And by the way, if you'd like to look this up in the open literature, this is under Schumann cavity resonance, S-C-H-U-M-A-N-N. If you do a word search on that at the library, you'll get about 250 references for a musician named Schumann. Go to the bottom of those, and if there are any references for the Schumann frequency, that's where you'll find them. So here's what we're seeing. Here again, time is moving in this direction, and our frequency increase is on this scale over here. What we're seeing is this, that as we move forward in time, this vibration is increasing, and again, it's nonlinear. The more it increases, the faster it increases. Now, there's something interesting about the way that frequency appears to be governed in our lives. There's a series of numbers. If you've studied the science of sacred geometry, I know you're very familiar with these numbers. If you've been to any of our workshops, you've seen them. It is called the Fibonacci, or Fibonacci, F-I-B-O-N-A-C-C-I. Fibonacci series of numbers. It is a sequence that begins like this. These are the first 12 elements of the sequence. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144. Any element is derived by taking the sum of the previous two elements. 1 plus 1 are 2, 2 plus 1 are 3, 3 plus 2 are 5. This is a key, a fundamental code in governing the way that life expresses in our world. In your body, for example, if you're to measure the tip of any finger in your hand to that first joint, you will get a number, and so will the person sitting next to you. And if you take from that tip to the next joint, you'll get another number, and so will the person next to you, and the numbers will all be different. If you divide one number into the next, if you divide the big number into the little number, what you will get, even though the numbers are all different, the ratio between the two numbers will be the same. It happens with this series of numbers. You divide 8 into 5, or 3 into 2. And that ratio looks like this, 0.618. We call it the golden ratio, the golden mean. It appears to be such a powerful series of numbers, governing not only the proportions of the human body and the way our eyes are set in our head, and the heights of our ears, and where our nose is from the top of our lips, how large our lungs are, where the navel is in proportion to the rest of the body, how a finger knows to be a little finger instead of a thumb or an index finger. This series of numbers governs the branching pattern on trees, the root systems on plants, the way that water forks and branches as it moves downhill, the way that lightning branches, if you see finger lightning as it moves through the sky. Those dendritic patterns are all governed by this series of numbers, and it appears that this series of numbers also governs the fundamental heartbeat of our Earth.